Hi, good morning. Alrighty, so we are jumping into chapter 9 today. Chapter 8 was about worldviews and evolution and creationism, and we're going to move straight into chapter 9 and do one evaluation next week over the 2 chapters because the classification systems that you will learn about today, because it's the classification system that almost everybody uses, is very heavily influenced by the theory of evolution. And so you have to deal with classification as an outgrowth of the evolutionary worldview. There is another way of looking at classification that we're going to get to next week, but almost nobody uses it. So even as Christians doing biology, this is the classification system that you need to be familiar with, because it's the classification system that everybody but maybe 10 people in the world use. So we need to talk about it, we need to be able to use it, we need to be familiar with it, even though it assumes evolution. You don't have to assume evolution to use it, but the system does assume evolution. So we need to be familiar with how it works, and we need to have our guard up as to the worldview that is being taught to us with regard to how we classify things. So take a moment and write down this first slide, and we'll start chatting in a second. So the science of classification is called taxonomy. A taxon is a Greek word, and it means group. And so taxonomy is the study of groups. There have been, and your book goes through a series of historical taxonomic attempts, historically different ways to try to organize living things. The system that we use today was created by a guy named Carolus Linnaeus. Linnaeus was a Christian, but Linnaeus also believed in evolution in a sense. He was before Darwin. So he was not a Darwinist. He did not believe in Darwin's method of evolution. But he did believe in descent with modification as a descriptive tool to explain why we have all these different creatures. He had his own view of how things evolved, and he actually kind of laid some of the foundational understanding that Darwin used to create his theory of natural selection. So Carolus Linnaeus was a Christian and an evolutionist, and you can be a Christian and an evolutionist. It just really messes up your view of the Bible and has lots of other consequences. But that's what this guy was. And he looked around him and he said, you know, this creature is kind of like this creature with some differences. So they must be in a group together of creatures that have these certain groups of characteristics. And then he would compare that group of critters to another group of critters and say, yeah, they're very similar, but they have some differences. And so we should put these 2 groups in a bigger group and label that bigger group. And so he created this nested hierarchy. Hierarchy. What is hierarchy? Wow. What does hierarchy mean? Higher. Hierarchy can be used with regard to government, or it can be used with regard to organization, and it means small things and then bigger things and like layers. You guys ever seen? The Russian nesting dolls? The little doll that fits inside the bigger doll that fits inside the bigger doll, right? The Russian nesting doll is a great example of a hierarchy where something is big and envelops everything. And then there's a smaller group inside that, and a smaller group inside that, and a smaller group inside that. So when we talk about hierarchical government, we would say that the city government exists and is a real thing. But the city government has to obey the county government. And here on the island, we only have one city and county, but it's the only place in the world I've ever seen that. The cities have to obey the county. And the counties have to then obey the state, and the states then have to obey the national government, and the national governments work with each other to come up with international laws that they all agree to abide by. So hierarchy can mean government. It can also mean here organizational systems, where you have a very small group, which is all the members of one species. And then you can take all of those individual species and put them together in bigger groups that we call genuses. And those groups can fit together in big groups we call families, etc. And so it's a nested hierarchical system of organizing things developed by this guy, Carolus Linnaeus. Okay? Here's the organizational system. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. You should, I think, remember this because this much of classification is dealt with in life science. So it's been a while since 8th grade, but hopefully you remember kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Okay, good. And there are various little anecdotal ways of remembering that. I learned King Philip came over for ginger snaps. And so you could do that. And you can come up with your own acronym. Does anybody else have another one? Do you remember another one that you learned? Good soup, okay, same thing. Yeah. Crystal is smirky. Do you have another one that's, which was what?
Kids getting playing cat on the freeway gets smashed.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, kids play catch on freeway, get smashed. Oh, that's terrible. That's awesome, though. That'll totally stick with you. Yeah. So, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So this is a hierarchy. Species is the smallest group. Kingdom is the biggest group. Okay. So if you wanted to say, well, what is the classification system for the bottlenose dolphin? We could look at the bottlenose dolphin and come up with groups that it belongs in for all of these. So it's in the kingdom Animalia because it is an animal. And it has various characteristics that make it an animal. And then of the animals, it has a backbone. So it's in the phylum Chordata. It has a spinal column. Okay? And then of the animals that have a spinal column, it has hair and breathes air and nurses the young and is warm-blooded. So it's a mammal. Okay? So, yeah, just a few, not a lot, but it does have hair. And so it's a mammal. And then of the mammals, it has a nostril that is up on top of his forehead instead of down at the end of his nose. And it swims in the water, and it has a fluke, and it has no back legs. And so that makes it a cetacean, whales and dolphins. And of the cetaceans, it has teeth and is not as long as its others. And so a shorter whale sort of creature that has teeth is in the family, in the family Delphinidae. And within the family Delphinidae, there are a group of dolphins that have a bottle-shaped nose. In other words, the head comes way down to the nose that sticks out. It's kind of like the neck of a bottle, where it's by no means as big as the head. So we use a word tersiops, which means to squeeze down. And then its nose is shorter than the other dolphins in that group. And so tersiops truncatus means short. So it's squeezed down and short is its nose, and you can see that there. And that is the bottlenose dolphin, the tersiops truncatus. Okay, so you see how these groups fit within each other. There are other phylums in the kingdom Animalia, but this is the phylum that the dolphin belongs to. There are other classes in the phylum Chordata, but this is the class that the dolphin belongs to. So it fits in these groups as we go down. Okay? And I want to give you characteristics. Animals are eukaryotic multicellular organisms with differentiated cells. They're mobile at some stage of their development, and they're heterotrophic. And then a chordate is an animal with a spinal cord of some degree of complexity for at least some stage of its development, or it may or may not be protected by a vertebral column. And a mammal, I just moved far away. A mammal is an animal which breathes air, nurses their young. His body hair are endothermic and almost always give live birth. And then a cetacean is an animal which lives in a marine or aquatic environment, has a blowhole, has flukes and flippers, lacks rear appendages, and has smooth skin. A delphinidae, cetaceans which have a single blowhole, possess teeth, and can turn their head, tend to be small. Tursiops, a dolphin-like body, shorter nose, higher forehead, and Truncatus, the shorter nose of the two species of Tursiops. So that's how we get to the names of these things. Okay. Naming rules. Bless you. You just sneeze that way. We use Latin for naming creatures. So, yay, Latin. You are already learning this, so this chapter will be a breeze to you. You'll just read it all and be like, oh, that's what that means. No sweat. We use Latin or Latinized words. So Latinized, we always want our words to sound Latin in the organization of living things. But sometimes we take a word that is not actually Latin and we add the suffix to it that would make it look Latin, even though it's not. So, yeah, so for example, my advisor in college, Rafe Payne, awesome guy, Dr. Payne. He described a new species of parasite in his work, and he named it after his mentor, his advisor in college, right? But his advisor didn't have a last name that was Latin. So he took his advisor's last name, and then he added a suffix to it to make it look like a Latin word. Yeah, or something like that, yeah. And so now it looks like a Latin word, but it is not a Latin word. So you can't read that and be like, oh, in Latin that means something. No, that's this dude's last name with something that's stuck to the end of it. So the name is either a Latin name or it's a Latinized word. It's made to pretend that it's Latin, right? It's given a toga, okay? Yeah. When we name things, when we get down to the last two, the genus and the species, the genus and the species of something together make the name that we say this thing is this. When we name a creature, we use the genus name and the species name as like its first and last name. So for example, you are Homo sapien. Homo sapien, you are in the genus Homo, okay? Which means like or similar to, and that means like man-like. You are like a man. That's what you are. And then sapien means wise or thinking, and so you are thinking man, right? That's your name. Congratulations, thinking man. And so when we get down to that, the last two words, the genus and the species, are the organism's proper name in science. We capitalize the genus, we do not capitalize the species, and both are underlined or italicized. And you can't really italicize your handwriting, so in your notes, underline, because that's easier. But if you're typing, either an underline or an italic is correct. I'm not sending questions.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So that's how we indicate the genus and the species of the creatures. Okay, and that helps them stand out on the page. If you're reading something about an organism, the name will jump out on the page from you because the name is either italicized. Okay. Come along now. There you go. So, of the things here, you don't have to write this down. These are just lots of ways of writing Homo sapiens, and not all of them are correct. So I wanted to help you identify what would be correct. So Homo sapiens here, not right because the S is capitalized and it's not italicized or underlined. This is fine. Capital, not capital, and underlined. That works. That's good. No bueno. That's not capitalized. That doesn't work. This does not work. It's not italicized or capitalized. This does not work because the capital S. This does. This is fine. You can do that. No, because the genus is not capitalized. No, the genus is not capitalized. And no, the genus is not capitalized and species is. So this is just an example of lots of ways that you could try to do that. Only two of them are right. There they are. All right, lab students. Oh, I just gave you the answer. What does our name mean? Thinking man. Okay, there it is. There you go. Well, so when they say man here, they don't mean like the male gender. They mean the kind of creature, you are mankind. Okay, so there are various kingdoms of life. And there are 6 of them. 6 kingdoms. Archaebacteria. So what does archae mean? Archae is actually a Greek word, but it has been Latinized. What does anybody have a guess as to what archae means? Curvy, no. Archae means old. Archaeology, study of old things, right? So here we get the evolutionary assumption starts to show up. Archaebacteria means the older form of bacteria. Well, we as Christians believe that God made the old kind of bacteria and the modern kind of bacteria on the same day, right? But the evolutionary perspective is that these are the simpler kind of bacteria. And the assumption is that that means that they are older, that they have been on the earth longer. But that's an assumption. That is not an assumption we share. So Archaebacteria is the simplest form of life. They are prokaryotes. Thinking back to chapter 3, what does prokaryotic mean? What? I heard you say it. Without a nucleus, thank you very much. And even that word assumes evolution, because pro doesn't mean without, pro means before. So even that assumes evolution, right? These are the creatures that existed before there was such a thing as a nucleus, right? Thank you for playing. But it's the word that is used. So Archaebacteria are prokaryotic. They are the simplest forms of cells, and they lack this particular kind of protein called peptidoglycan in cell walls. What does peptidoglycan do? Don't stress about it, okay? But it is a way of distinguishing Archaebacteria from eubacteria. Archaebacteria don't have a nucleus and don't have peptidoglycan. Eubacteria are prokaryotic, but do have peptidoglycan in their cell walls. So it's just a way of distinguishing those two kinds of bacteria. All of these are going to be single cellular. And some of the pictures I have up here, this is a string of little spherical bacteria. And so, you know, this is one individual and another individual. But they live in these chains, this colony chain where they, you know, are stuck to their neighbor. And so this is a way that they're found in nature. This lake, these ridiculously acidic, ridiculously hot acid lakes in Yellowstone. Yeah.
What?
Yep. Yeah, this is a lake of sulfuric acid. You do not want to go swimming in that lake. Okay. This is a lake of sulfuric acid. This particular one is in Yellowstone National Park. There are others around the world in very, very volcanic regions. So, but in this sulfuric acid lake, there are these bacteria living. And you know, sulfuric acid kills things really well, but it doesn't kill that. And those bacteria live in that ridiculous lake. So it's crazy. Eubacteria, true bacteria, and so these are bacteria, they're still prokaryotic, they still don't have a nucleus, but they do have peptidoglycan in their cell walls. This is the most abundant form of life on Earth. If you were, an alien visiting the planet and you wanted to know what's the most successful kind of life on the planet, it's not you and me with regard to population. There's tons more bacteria in the world than there is anything else. So the most abundant form of life on Earth is actually bacteria. The third kingdom is Protista. Protista, now these are eukaryotic, so these have a nucleus. These are frequently colonial, meaning that they are sometimes living by themselves, like this cell is. This is a single-celled protist. This is a single-celled protist, an amoeba. They are single-celled life, but they have a nucleus, so they're not bacteria. They're a lot more complicated than a bacteria. Some of the most complicated cells in the world are protists. We have the advantage of having lots of different cells that are specialized. They do different jobs. So we don't have to have our respiration and our digestion and our excretion and our locomotion all done by the same kind of cell. These guys, they're only one cell, and they respire, and they eat, and they digest, and they locomote, and they reproduce, and they do all kinds of things with one cell. So, very complicated cells. They are frequently colonial, though. This giant kelp picture here, giant kelp, you look at it, if you've ever seen it, it's not in our waters because our waters are too warm. But in California, these giant kelp colonies, they look like a plant, but they're not a plant. Every cell in that giant kelp structure is the same kind of cell. If you look at a cell anywhere on that structure, it's going to be exactly the same. Then they're all independent of each other. They don't pass nutrients or dissolved gases or anything between the cells. They're all individually living by themselves, glued to their neighbor. So it's actually a colony. This giant kelp is a colony of individual cells, and that is a protist. And it's often classified by exclusion. If you have something and you say, what in the world is this? And you can say, well, it's not an animal because of something, it's not a plant because of something, it's not a bacteria because it has a nucleus, it's not a fungus because of some reason. This thing must be a protist. It's kind of the bucket that we throw strange things in. And we don't know really what it is, but it's protist. So it's our catch-all kingdom. Strange things go there. Kingdom 4, fungi. Fungi, and it is a soft G. I hear a lot of people say fungi. Fungi is somebody who's at your party and makes it a better place. Okay. Right? It's a soft G, fungi. So, but if you talk about fungus, now it's a hard G, fungus. But if you talk about multiple funguses, then they are fungi. Okay. There you go. Fungi are heterotrophic, so they don't make their own food. Some protists are heterotrophic, some protists are autotrophic, some bacteria are heterotrophic, some bacteria are autotrophic. But fungi are all heterotrophic, and this is what makes them not a plant, is fungi don't make their own food. They don't grow up and get food from the sun like plants do. Okay, they're heterotrophic. They're frequently colonial. They are multicellular. They are mold, funguses, and yeast. So we did that thing with the bread and the yogurt, and those were fungi. Both of the things that we used were fungi. And so, no, the yogurt was bacteria. Sorry, but the yeast was fungi. So you're putting fungi in your bread when you have yeast bread. And of course, if you eat mushrooms, then you're eating fungi too. But these are things that decompose dead stuff. So they eat other things, but they don't have to chase it down because it's already dead. So these are things that eat dead stuff. Okay. Plantae. Plantae. this kingdom are multicellular. They're autotrophic, which means they, what does autotrophic mean again? Autotrophic means what? Trophos means to feed or to eat, and auto means self. So they eat themselves? No.
No.
They make their own food. Yes, good. They photosynthesize, and so these are plants that make their own food. Cell specialization. Here, for the first time, we have different kinds of cells. If you dissect a fungus, every cell in that fungus looks exactly like every other cell in that fungus. If you dissect a plant, that's not the case. There are different kinds of cells that do different jobs, and so the different cells are specialized in a plant. And then cells that have cell walls and chloroplasts automatically fall into the kingdom Plantae. There are some bacteria that have photosynthetic abilities, but there's no chloroplasts in them. There are some protists that have photosynthetic abilities, and they do have chloroplasts, but there's no cell walls in the sense of a plant, cell walls. So a cell that has cell walls and chloroplasts is a plant cell. And some plants are asexual and some plants are sexual. And that is also true of funguses. Some funguses are asexual, some funguses are sexual. But for plants, there's more complexity there. Some of these pictures are amazing. These plants are here in Hawaii. I've seen these hiking. You've probably seen these in the jungles hiking too. Huge leaves, like, I don't know, almost the size of my podium, or sometimes even bigger. Monster leaves, and so colorful. I think God was, when he built that, he's like, I'm just gonna go big and bright. What am I? Big and bright. Yeah, look at that leaf. Like, it's just cool. It's beautiful. Praise the Lord for that. And then little itsy bitsy clovers, you know, tiny things. These mosses are just gorgeous. And this pitcher plant, this is a plant that eats bugs. There are just so many cool kinds of plants out there. And then this one, have you seen this kind of flower?
Yeah. No.
Oh, whoa! Just kidding. How did that happen? There you go. Have you seen this flower?
No.
Doesn't it stink?
Yes, that is the lily of the rotting corpse. Yep, it smells like dead animals that are decomposing.
Why
And
is that guy?
Why would that
yeah,
person
why
put
is that guy standing
just to
right
show
there?
how big it is, it smells like a rotting animal, and lots of flowers smell pretty and attract bees. This one smells like a rotting animal and attracts flies. And the flies pollinate. The flies pollinate flowers. So isn't that cool? God's just like, everything else smells really good. What else can I do? Stinky. Yeah, stinky flower. That's cool. So there you go. Kingdom 6 is Animalia. Okay. Kingdom 6 is Animalia, and my capture screen for some reason is not grabbing the sheet. Gotta grab the sheet. There you go. Okay. Oh, my picture's gone. Oh well, they don't need to see my mind. Okay. So biological classification number 6 is the kingdom Animalia. These are multicellular organisms, like plants were. These also have cellular specialization, like plants were. But unlike plants, these are heterotrophs. Heterotrophs means they eat other things. So we don't walk outside and be like, yeah, I'm kind of hungry. I'm full. No, that would be really cool if we could. But we don't. Animals are not autotrophs. We have to eat something else. We are eukaryotic. We have true cells with nuclei. And every animal is mobile at some stage of development. There are some animals that are not mobile as adults. Corals are not mobile as adults. Sea lilies are not mobile as adults. Sea anemones are not mobile as, as adults. But as larvae or juveniles, they are mobile. So every animal can go somewhere at some stage.
Is
Okay?
that actually wrong? I always say like,
What?
what is it?
The blobfish?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Whoa,
blobfish.
it's a
Blobfish.
So if you throw it, will it like go splash?
So it lives at
Flat and it goes flat.
It lives at great depth. very, very, very deep, where there's lots of water pressure. And so its body is meant to withstand huge amounts of water pressure. And then so what happens when they get caught in a net at depth and brought up to our pressure to be photographed is their body just blew up on it doesn't know what to do without all that water pressure. So swimming around at its depth, it doesn't look like that. But when you bring it up in a net,
It looks so
okay?
It's so cute.
Yeah.
It's like a little
So some of these things are really beautiful. Like when God painted the macaw, he did a great job, and this little fish is just gorgeous. And some things are, very cute, like the jumping lamb and the little ducklings.
I think they're sharp.
And then there's the ones where God's like, yeah, big nose and squishy body. Let's try that.
I think that's like
The blobfish. This is actually one of my favorite creatures. The scalloped hammerhead pelagic shark is
so cute.
amazing. I've been diving with them twice, and just awesome experiences. So yeah, the pelagic scalloped hammerhead.
Is it that fish is so happy?
What? Oh, the lamb.
The blobfish.
Oh, the blobfish.
It's so
You think that looks happy?
It's so sad. It's like I think it's so cute.
I think you need some emotional counseling if you think that looks happy. His mouth is definitely downturned.
It's so cute.
Okay, so this is the part we need to have our guard up on, right? So the Bible classification, taxonomy expresses dominion, the ability to walk into nature and say, I'm going to take these groups of creatures and I'm going to group them and I'm going to call them something. That's very biblical. Adam did that, right? Adam said, you are duck. You are bird. You are whatever, right? He named these things. And so we are walking in his tradition, very, very clearly an expression of dominion to organize things. But the Bible only uses the word kind. And so that doesn't mean that that's the only word we should use. But that is the biblical word for describing the category of creature that this is. The Bible says that animals will reproduce after their kind, and that plants reproduce according to the seeds that are in them after their kind. And the word kind is used repeatedly in Genesis 1 and 2, and also scattered around throughout the rest of the Bible. A couple of other times, organisms are described as reproducing after their kind. So we use the word species in taxonomy, which is not the biblical word, but that's okay. You don't have to limit yourself to only the vocabulary of the Bible, as long as you know that the categorization of modern taxonomy assumes evolution, right? When Linnaeus said there are multiple species in a genus, he didn't just give a name to a group of creatures that are somewhat similar. He assumed, and so do modern biologists, that everything in a genus shares a recent common ancestor, and that they are brother and sister taxa from some not too distant past common ancestor. And then when you group genuses together into families, you're not just saying that these genuses share characteristics, you're saying that these genuses are related to each other. And at some point, there was a common ancestor that gave rise to all of these genuses, all of these species. Taxonomy, as I just presented it to you, assumes evolution. So, as Christians, we can use the words family, genus, species, kingdom, final class. We can throw those words around. We can use the words, Mammalia, Cetacea, Delphinidae. We don't have to feel like we're betraying God by using those words. But you must be aware that the words that you're using assume evolution. And so as you use them, you have to be clear in your mind that while I am talking about a group of organisms that share characteristics, I do not assume that that means that they have evolved from one another. I'm just saying that they share characteristics, right? You can share characteristics without having to have evolved from some common ancestor. We do acknowledge speciation, and we talked about this with the evolution lecture. It's okay to say that one species becomes another kind of species. But we're talking about microevolution there, very small changes. I gave you the example of the honey creeper here on Hawaii, the example of the finches in the Galapagos Islands. These are small changes. Nothing is becoming a new body plan, an entirely different sort of creature. That doesn't happen. That would be crossing the kind line, right? We would not support any idea that says that one kind of creature became another kind of creature. And there is a movement within the church, within Christian scientists, to say, let's come up with our own classification system that uses the biblical concept of a kind, and is okay with speciation, but not okay with, I don't know what you kind of call it, kindiation, one kind becoming another kind of kind. And so there's a movement within Christians doing biology to come up with a new classification scheme, and that scheme is still being worked out. It's very young. It's totally not ready for the world to use yet. But the name that they're using for it is called Baraminology. So bara is the Hebrew word to create out of nothing. In Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Hebrew word there is bara, created. So they're saying bara, where God created things, right? And then the word min, M-I-N, in Hebrew, is the root word behind our English word kind for the text. So when it says he made them after their kind, he made them after their min in Hebrew. So they took create, kind, and then stuck ology on the end of it to make it science, right? So this is the science of created kinds. And this is a movement, to try to say, let's come up with some system that very clearly teaches that God created kinds and does not assume evolution. So we will play with this idea next week, but it's not something that you're going to read in the textbook anytime soon, because it's brand new. But we'll fiddle with that concept a little bit next week. Okay? Any questions, comments?